Good morning, everyone. We're continuing. Oops. Good morning. We're continuing with the excerpt, chapter 17, from Swamiji's biography of Master's salient qualities. Live like Yogananda, we're calling this, of course. So now let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to all. Help us to attune ourselves to your inward presence, that we may live in this world as you would have us live, in constant awareness of your loving presence, as active, living instruments of your presence in this world. We are your children. Inspire and guide us. Om. Peace. Amen. So today's quality, which is number 5 out of the 32 or 34 that we're working with, Yogananda was completely centered in the infinite self. As he wrote in his poem, Samadhi, I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. Even a master requires enough ego to keep his body moving and active in this world. But such a person's true center lies by no means in his little body. I remember once walking with him at his desert retreat. He was deep in the spirit. 2 or 3 times I had actually to support his body in order to keep it from falling. He remarked to me one day, I am in all bodies. It is difficult for me to remember to keep this one body especially moving. In Los Angeles, I was told he sometimes walked up and down Main Street in a locale that contained many bars. He didn't say a word, but to me it is clear that he was centered in those people inside the bars, perhaps protecting them from those low astral entities which are always eager to possess people who are on the brink of unconsciousness. Well, that's all very interesting, isn't it? I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. And it's so interesting over many years of studying and reading Master's words, how just different links will suddenly be made. He uses the pronoun I, but then defines it as the cosmic sea. But from the perspective of the infinite, he's simultaneously conscious of the little ego. So he knows himself as the separate individual, but also has the capacity completely to observe himself. And then Swami adds, which we've mentioned already several times, that there has to be enough ego involved to be able to carry out a personal mission in order to be an avatar. As I believe I was quoting yesterday, from that state of infinite freedom, the Master does take a body at the request of the divine, and then he carries out that particular assignment in that particular way. The egolessness is the fact that there's nothing personal in it for him. I mean, the ego is the soul identified with the physical body, and there has to be, that's how Master defined ego, there has to be enough identification with that physical body, as he said, to keep it going. And Master said toward the end of his life, he would forget, which body he was supposed to keep going. There's an incident, an experience I had with Swamiji and Swami reflecting on Master's consciousness that I've written in my book of stories about Swamiji, Swami Kriyananda as we have known him. But in this whole context, I was thinking about it again. And that was the time that we were at Disneyland with Swamiji. There were about 15 or 20 of us. It was a big group. We'd gone down from Ananda Village to Los Angeles to partake in some spiritual fair that was going on there. Swami would often take several carloads of us to run the booths at a fair or run the book table, and really just to give us the experience of what it was like to share these teachings, to try to attract people and then inspire them with what we were doing. And Swamiji enjoyed visiting Disneyland, so we took a day at the end and we all went to Disneyland. And at the end of that day, this would have been in the mid-70s. Disneyland itself was more innocent then. When dusk would come in Disneyland, I presume it's still that way, I don't know, I haven't been in years, they would have something that was called the Electric Parade. And the characters in costume, the big costumes dressed like the Disney characters, would parade down the street, and their costumes would be illuminated with lights. And there would be floats and things. It was astral. It was just really marvelous and very lighthearted. And after a day of playing in this wonderful fantasy world, you'd see all these characters dancing down the street, and they would be outlined in lights, and the dusk would be settling in. It was marvelous. So when it was time for that to begin, we went over there a few minutes early so that we could get a good seat, and our little crowd was sort of standing together. And the whole visitors population of Disneyland was beginning to gather in that one place. And Disneyland is like it's a little United Nations. People from everywhere are there in all kinds of languages. And I particularly remember in this context that there was a group of people from Japan, and they had little children in strollers, and naturally people from Japan look Japanese, in that case at least. So they didn't look exactly like me. And I had to, you have to make that transition to realize how everybody's just the same, no matter what they look like. And we were just standing there, and Swamiji, as was his inclination, sometimes he would just, his mood would suddenly shift into something quite different than whatever we had been doing. And he was standing there, and you could feel that bhav, this really deep bhav coming into him. And we were looking at these hundreds of people, including this Japanese coterie and people from many different parts of the world. And Swami just turned to us and he said, imagine, he said, not merely loving all these people. And the implication of that was, you can imagine loving all these people, seeing the Japanese families taking care of their babies. I keep mentioning them because that's the strongest visual image in my mind, and how darling the little babies were. Your heart just opens immediately to all of this. So Swami said, imagine not merely loving all these people, but actually being every one of these people. Being as much inside their reality, standing centers everywhere, moving one center of spirit into their consciousness. And think about it, the consciousness that you and I carry. I have a whole list of concerns. Just before I started this broadcast, I was running through various possibilities of things I could do, and long-term, short-term, what is today about, what am I going to do in the next few weeks, just all of that. And nobody else on the planet, seemingly, is standing right where I'm standing, running these particular thoughts, because this is the center of my reality. So then Swamiji is saying to us, looking at all these total strangers in Disneyland, imagine being so fluid in our own sense of identification and so expanded in our awareness that we could just as easily move into the consciousness of any one of these people and suddenly see the whole of creation from their point of view. Imagine not merely loving these people, but being every one of them. And we tried to sort of take our minds and our hearts there. And Swami said that was Master's consciousness. Master could stand in the center of this many people, and just as easily as he could think his own thoughts, he could think their thoughts. Now, Swami himself told us that Master said to him, I know every single thought that you think. And he demonstrated, as Swami told us, he demonstrated many times that even at a great distance, Master would just comment on something Swami said or something Swami was considering. And Swamiji just grew to take it, and take it for granted would be not the right word, but not to be surprised that of course Master did, because Master was as much in his consciousness as he was in his own. And think how mightily we strive even to understand someone else's motivation, to understand the perspective from which they're seeing it. And I'm sure you've had, as I've had, colossal misunderstandings that just develop because I just made certain assumptions about you. You made certain assumptions about me. You decided this is what I thought. You decided that particular expression on my face meant this certain thing, or these words meant this certain thing. I remember having a very heated interchange with a friend of mine who was ascribing to my words an intention that simply was not there. And I remember finally with great force, I'm the one who said it. I'm the one who has the right to tell you what those words meant. You can't persuade me that I meant something I didn't mean. It's just like we're always fighting for the least bit of understanding. And Master just effortlessly shifted into anybody's perspective, because I, the cosmic sea, watched the little ego, and Master knew that he had an ego. He knew that he was an individualized person. He knew that he had a body, he had to carry it out. Even in the path, Master writes, Swami writes, repeating Master's words, when from what perspective are these words coming? We can only imagine. Master said when he sees, when it's time for him to reincarnate, to come back as an avatar, as he's done really quite a few times. We have no idea how many. We know of a number of incarnations he's taken as an avatar, not compelled by karma, but since his absolute realization. When I see the personality, I have to assume, Master said, at first it's uncomfortable, like a heavy overcoat on a hot day. Just think about that. The whole personality that he assumes is like a heavy overcoat on a hot day. Then you can sort of think, oh, this just is uncomfortable, it itches, why do I have to wear this? And then Master said, but after a while I get used to it and I don't mind. So he knows about it. He sees the little ego in its heavy overcoat of personality. And Master had a personality in the sense that he was an extremely distinctive individual with a sense of humor. This is what we're going through, with a sense of humor and a commitment to his mission and creative ideas about what he was supposed to do, and deep human feelings. This is what I was talking about yesterday. He played the whole part. He walked on stage. I've been part of theater productions. I just was in my pre-Ananda life, just school productions and a little bit of community theater where you're, there's the backstage part and then there's the onstage part. And nowadays, because there's so many documentaries about ballet dancers and actors, and even if you've never done it yourself, you see the camera. The camera sees the scene. You see the ballet dancer, stretching and getting ready and pulling herself together, himself together, and then that spot of music comes and that dancer leaps out onto the stage. And then for the next minutes, whatever it is, just passionately pours themselves into who they're supposed to be when they're on stage. And then they're finished and they come whizzing into the wings and it's over. Now, both sides are equally true. The backstage moment when it's not necessary to be that person anymore, And the onstage moment when every fiber of their being is dedicated to what they're doing. The image of theater is often used when we're talking about the extraordinary, interesting dynamic of being a human being and having the infinite self become conditioned by this little body. The avatar, inwardly, as I was saying yesterday, as quoting Swami, inwardly they're always free. But when Master steps onto that stage, he doesn't hold back. He's completely committed to it. And this is, see, among the things that, the reason that I'm going through these qualities of Master is given by what we're calling this series. We're not talking, the series is not called Who is Yogananda? The series is called Live Like Yogananda. So we have to, as much as we can, take this example of perfection and pull from it the reality of it that comes to where we're standing, so we can grasp that thread and follow it all the way to realization. So one of the profound errors that people make is they think, well, if I'm not going to identify with my ego, if I don't want to strengthen my ego, then I will become passive. And the Bhagavad Gita deals with this at great length. Inaction is an action. And the model for how we should live as a human being are the masters. That's why they come. Then that's why they fully participate and are fully influenced by human reality. And again, this is what I was talking about yesterday, but do it perfectly. So Master was totally committed to being Paramhansa Yogananda. And there was never an ounce of him that held back in the name of being detached or not identified. It was exactly the opposite. He was so free that he could give himself completely to it. And in fact, again, Swami writes about him in many places about because Master's realization was so complete and had been achieved so long ago that Swami said he wore his realization like a comfortable old jacket, to use the coat image a second time. He just wore it like a comfortable old jacket. He didn't have to protect it. He didn't have to make decisions based on, I better be careful. I mean, I make lots of decisions based on, I better be careful. Because I know that the tiny, understanding that I have is quite vulnerable. But Master, he was completely invulnerable. I mean, Swami himself said to us, community leaders, the phrase he used was, it's presumptuous not to take your own spiritual welfare into account. And presumptuous was exactly the right word, because Master could be completely free. That doesn't mean that I can be completely free. It would be presumptuous in that respect. But still, we're seeing what it is that it actually finally looks like. It finally looks like we're just so comfortable in this state of being that we can just move through this world in a state of absolute relaxation. Now, of course, then one has natural affinities which you follow. Being free doesn't mean then, therefore, you wallow in low consciousness. In fact, often one uses that as a justification and becomes presumptuous. Well, I'm not really attracted to drink anymore, so I'll just keep going to the bars with my friends. There may be a certain desire to go back into that energy, and it's presumptuous not to take yourself into account. Now, I wanted to let's talk about, since we're talking about bars, let's talk about Master, what Swami said, this really extraordinary thing that Master used to do, which was walked in this district where there were a lot of bars. The way Swami has described it in other places is that it was a really not an uplifted district at all. But it was a place where people who were addicted to alcohol would go to drink. And Swami refers to Master would walk up and down the street protecting people from the lower astral entities. I mean, among many reasons why intoxicants are considered one of the major delusions, I mean, if you really go way down into it, that there are disincarnate entities that have died, physically died. They're just people. You say disincarnate entity. It's a person without a body. When they had a body, you would have been able to just talk to them as a person. Such a person dies, but is so attached to some aspect of the material world that they won't leave. And such disincarnate entities, which means a person, a ghost, a person who doesn't have a body of their own anymore, but still wants to have a body because they still want certain experiences. And such beings, that's where possession takes place. And possession is real. And I'm not trying to make anyone paranoid, but possession is real. And the disincarnate entities look for individuals who are totally passive in their relationship to their own life. The blank-minded. People are afraid, if you meditate, you'll become possessed, but it's when you go blank-minded. Meditation is a dynamic habitation of your own awareness. Going blank, it's more like when people pass out to drink to the point of unconsciousness. And at that point where they're just about to give up their own body, disincarnate entities will try to get in. To have the experience of being drunk, to use that body to do wicked things. I mean, it is not uncommon for a person to commit some kind of a crime or some other kind of very bad action, and then remember becoming very drunk, waking up, sometimes in jail or in some other circumstance, and having no memory of what happened in between. And sometimes that's because they lost consciousness, another being took possession of their body, used their body, for something like rape or murder, something really terrible. And then the poor person will have no idea of why I would have done that, because they really weren't in control. And this is not a small thing. And I'm trying to scare you. You can't just mess around with these things. Now, doesn't happen to everyone, and it doesn't happen all the time. But Swami has said, and Master said, these disincarnate beings hang around places where people are surrendering control of their own consciousness in the hope that they'll get a chance. It's very unwholesome. I mean, to end up in prison for some violent crime is really bad, but it's unwholesome in any case. So I love that Swami put in there. I mean, this is like, every time Swami writes something, he reveals a little bit more of the story. That perhaps Master was protecting these drunken people from being invaded by disincarnate beings. It's just like, who were the ones that Master was helping? Why was he drawn there? Master said that not a single person crossed his path except that it was decreed, specifically individually decreed by Divine Mother, that person should have contact with a saint. Edgar Casey in his life readings multiple times said that the most important thing that had happened to the soul in front of him in 1940 was that 2,000 years ago they were on the street, Jesus went by and they saw him. Or Jesus looked at them and they looked eye to eye for just a moment. One moment in the company of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. That's an aphorism in India. And it's true. So Master, these souls, often people who are deeply addicted to drink are actually very sensitive and even deeply spiritual people who just find this world unbearable. And that's why they intoxicate themselves. That's what intoxication is. It's imagining that we can escape suffering by diminishing our consciousness. But there's an awareness of the suffering. And the awareness of the inherently, profoundly disappointing nature of this plane of consciousness is the beginning of spiritual awakening. So Master was there helping. And now, we don't have the power. I don't have the power. But I can live like Yogananda by always thinking a very simple question. What can I do that would be helpful? How can I help? Not with presumption, but with intuition. How can I help? That was all. I mean, there was nothing in it for Master to walk up and down in the Bowery district. He did it because he could feel souls that needed his help, because his own consciousness, the cosmic sea, just watched the little ego going all the way back to Disneyland. We're standing there getting ready to watch this parade. And Swami says, in that way, imagine not merely loving all these people, but actually being every one of them. And then I can still see the way his face shifted and his eyes shifted. And we actually literally just sat down on the sidewalk and meditated. Just sat down right there. And we went into meditation, and I can still again remember the meditation. And I think we were there for about half an hour. And then finally there was a commotion around us because the parade was coming. And we opened our eyes, and when we had arrived there was no one there because we were early, and now we were absolutely surrounded. And I mean, I have no idea what people thought. Everybody's standing around waiting for the parade, and there's this group of us just, sitting in meditation on the sidewalk there. And we just opened our eyes, just looked around, stood up and watched the parade. But it's one of those moments out of time, a moment of eternity. And then a meditation so deep that we didn't hear the crowd coming in around us or anything like that. We just lost track of where we were because we were trying to live like Yogananda. We were just contemplating exactly what Swami said. Not merely to understand or to love or to have kindly attitudes toward or anything like that, but what would it be like? And this is like the previous quality of Master we were talking about. He understands us from the inside. And these are all things that we can experiment with. We experiment with until they become natural to us. When we're with other people, when we're trying to understand them, don't be thinking and feeling always from the outside. And loving, of course, is the beginning. But also just stand inside their reality. What would it feel like to be you? And creative imagination, Master said, is an extremely helpful aspect of the spiritual path. Master told us to memorize the poem Samadhi. I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. Just a long meditation just on those few words. What is it to be the cosmic sea and see the person that is I clearly, but also see it in the context of this great infinity, and then realize that every incarnated being around us is having exactly the same experience. Oh, it makes life so interesting. It just makes every minute absolutely rich with spiritual potential. And then Master said, take care of the minutes, and the incarnations will take care of themselves. God bless you, my friends.